another episode in our informal series, Scumbags in the West who support jihadists who would have them executed right after they're done with the Jews. Today, we're talking about comedian Dave Smith. I know he's a big figure out there. Sorry, my some parts of pop culture are not that well known to me. I know uh, most people probably know who he is, and I know Mark Pellegrino is scheduled to have a debate with him at some point soon. So we thought, we'll honor, if we can use that word, this guy with an episode of his own. Now, I have to say, having watched some of his stuff in preparation for this episode, he's an eloquent guy. I mean, quite a few people on that side are eloquent, but he's eloquent. He also talks fast, which people always seem to, it's the Ben Shapiro style of I'm talking fast, so I must be super intelligent, and everything I say must be undeniably true, because otherwise I would talk really slowly, right? But we're gonna go through a little bit of his stuff. It is a 30-minute show, and also there's a limit to how much we can tolerate. But Daniel, you know Dave Smith better than I do, and yeah. So your initial thoughts before we get into some of the specific stuff he's been saying, mostly about Israel and the war there, but just generally.
So,
He is a libertarian, we should mention as well.
yeah, he's a libertarian, but something about Dave Smith, as you mentioned, he sort of like seems eloquent. He seems really to speak well. But something I've noticed is pretty much all of his knowledge is very much surface level. So he will be able to, he can have like all the talking points about pretty much any topic he talks about. But whenever you try to go a bit deeper, he starts to struggle a lot. I've seen one debate which he had. Uh, I would have to go and find it, but he was pretty much incapable of explaining what a non-aggression principle is, which is like the core of the libertarian, in a sense, ideology, and he wasn't able to actually describe what it means. So yeah, whenever you even in this debate, many points he makes sense on like a surface level, but as soon if you know any of the background, if you know history when it comes to this conflict, or sometimes he mentioned history, if you know any of the actual things on the ground, you can tell he's mostly bullshitting you, and you can call him out on it. So I'm looking forward to the Mark Pellegrino debate with him, and I think that that would be something I would recommend Mark to do. Basically, try to go deeper into any issue, and you'll see. I think you'll see Dave struggle a lot.
Yeah, and one thing we're just gonna play a couple of clips at some point of him in an appearance a couple of months ago on Piers Morgan, a Piers Morgan style appearance. So Piers Morgan had three people on, two pro-Hamas guys. Dave Smith was one of them, and Emily Austin, who is absolutely terrible as a defender of Israel. I mean, it is very much, it makes you question, not really question, it lets you know what Piers Morgan wants you to come away with from such a debate. I mean, it was shocking. On Twitter, she seemed okay, but listening to her actually attempt to defend Israel, and I'm not even sure that's what she was doing, is weird. But before that, one of the things I saw in preparation for this was his appearance, I think it was recent, on the Young Turks, with both Cenk, I believe, and
Yeah,
Anna Kasparian.
Chunkin.
And one thing he said there that I noted down is that he says that the way Israelis and pro-Israel people talk about Palestinians, it's as if they're not even human. When you talk about them, they're them dying in greater numbers, but it has to be, or whatever explanation he had. And the irony, this is an ironic thing about that side, is that that side doesn't see the Palestinians as humans. I mean, we see them as humans and we judge them morally as we do every human being, for better or worse. And when a whole society is built around the desire to finish the job that Hitler started, we judge that society negatively. But in his case, he's clearly, as we will see when we get to the Piers Morgan parts, he clearly has never actually either never listened to a Palestinian or is lying to us about what the Palestinians want, because he does push this pretense that Palestinians are not what they tell us they are.
Yeah, I think there is the sort of uh we should find a term for it, but there is sort of like a Western who just sort of like you sit on your couch and you think about the world, and sort of like your whole view is pretty much in a sense biased by like being middle class in the West. So you consider everything by that, so like in this case, like when we talk about Palestinians, yeah, there are people on October 7th, civilians who participated in the kidnapping, in the murdering, in the raping of Jewish people in Israel. For someone who has lived in the West, has lived peacefully, never was in any sort of conflict, it is really hard to imagine that a person would be like that, and that there would be Palestinians back in Gaza actually celebrating this. That for example, one of those I think, I'm not sure if he was specifically from Hamas, but like calling his mom and basically saying, "Hey, I killed Jewish people." It's hard to imagine that. So it's not that surprising that someone would have this sort of view. That's why I'm saying that I think Dave Smith is very surface level. Like you said, he probably doesn't know what's actually on the ground. He just has, and this is case for many libertarians. They just sort of have these ideas and don't actually care about what's going on the ground, what's the reality. And
Yeah, I mean, look, it's generous to say maybe he doesn't know what's on the ground, because when he talks, he knows some of the talking points, some of the facts generally about at least the timeline of Israel and or at least in recent decades, some of the timeline of the war. So I don't know. I really I think we are being too generous if we say that he doesn't know what's on the ground. I think he probably does. That some people do intentionally lie. And oh, another thing I disagree with you, Daniel, is blaming the middle class in the West. No, the people of any class in the West have a television, can turn on the BBC and think that everything they hear is necessarily as the BBC reports it, because they're journalists and they're unbiased. And they have to abide by certain rules that people with similar views enforce. So yeah, I don't believe him. Uh, Something else that he said, and I believe this was also in the Cenk video, um, at some point he says, the last thing we need is another war in the Middle East, which is again this talking point of the very far left and libertarians. They refer to what America did after 9/11, and not as insufficient or picking the easy target, but as we did everything we can and look, we failed. It's again, they refuse to listen not just to Palestinians but to everybody in the Middle East, saying that they want to get rid of not just Israel but America as well. And they're closer to the point where militarily they're capable of doing that with Israel. They're a bit further away from the point where they're capable of doing that with America. But people like Dave Smith move America further in that direction quicker. Uh, Thank you, Ask Yeshka, for the super chat. Ask Yeshka says, click the thumbs up icon, folks. L'chaim, absolutely. Yeah, get this video to more people by liking it, sharing it, commenting as well. Daniel.
Yeah, maybe we should go to the video. But basically, I mean, what you said about what I said, I'm struggling to actually believe the things Dave Smith says. I think you can only get like you kind of really have to listen. I feel like you can only get to the words he's saying by like being completely ignorant. Like, I want to have a faith in humanity, and like someone actually knowing everything on the ground, someone knowing all the details and still like having basically saying what he's saying. I I'd like to. I'm still young. Let me have few delusions for
Okay,
at
but
least
I
some
will
time.
say those delusions, if they're true, then or if they're true of some people, you're basically making the mistake that you're, I think, saying that he's making because he doesn't want to believe that Palestinians can be that way, and you don't want to believe that a middle class or upper class, presumably American, can be like that. But yeah, some people are actually not wrong or just wrong, but genuinely evil. And let's go to the first clip and look at an example of his evil.
Oh, uh, try again.
Conflict. Israel has occupied Palestine since 1967. We're not talking about a few months after a war or even a few years after a war. We're talking about longer than the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe. And the idea that people say, well, if Hamas just surrendered today, the war would be over. Like, let's even say that's true, which I'm not convinced it is, but let's say that's true. And then what? Live in subjugation forever? I mean, look, the height of the Netanyahu doctrine was 2 weeks before October 7th when he went to the United Nations with a map of greater Israel, including Gaza and the West Bank all being Israel. That was the peak of the Netanyahu doctrine. And what he was telling the world and the Palestinians was, it's over, you lost, we won, we made our deals with the outside Arab world, no one's coming to save you. You live in subjugation forever. And the culmination of that was October 7th.
Okay.
And that's not to remove responsibility
Can
from
I
Hamas.
respond?
Yeah,
But you cannot
Emily.
remove
All right, yeah, we definitely don't need to hear Emily Austin respond because her responses are atrocious. But yeah, so first of all, of course, he is absolutely lying here about what Netanyahu said. Netanyahu's policy, which he may not be openly still on that side since October 7th, but his policy has been for a very long time as Likud leader that ultimately the goal is for there to be a Palestinian state. Now, I'm not definitely not defending Netanyahu on this because and on many other things, but on this because I think that's the absolutely wrong policy. And having that policy is in large part what brought us October 7th. But that has been the official, it's been in the Likud party platform, and it has been Israel's policy for a long time. It's just that those negotiations always end up with Israel giving the Palestinians what they say they want, and the Palestinians giving Israel what they really want, which is, to kill Israelis. So yeah, he's lying here about Netanyahu to do what he generally does. He pays lip service to look, Hamas did bad things and so on, but he ultimately is doing whatever he can to make excuses for Hamas and their atrocities that they committed on October 7th and their very existence. Because to know whether or not this would be over if Hamas surrendered is it's not a difficult question because we know what Israel has done in past parts of this conflict. Israel always goes towards Hamas, always asks them for a ceasefire. Here, it's different because a ceasefire, while the hostages are still being held, is not actually an end to the current conflict. It's a situation where Hamas is still abusing Israelis and Israel is not fighting back.
Yeah, I mean, that whole I had to play it like several times. That whole sort of like those sentences just yeah, again are like so surface level. Like again, Israel has been occupying for so and so. Yeah, but it was and during that time, Palestinian terrorist groups have been attacking Israel at any chance they could get. And also, how did Israel just suddenly occupy these areas? No, several technically the Six-Day War was started by Israel, but it was preceded by basically I think this was preceded by Egypt closing the Suez Canal, which in the past has been basically used before starting this. Uh, but basically, so Israel had to attack these Arab nations before they would attack it, and then occupied Sinai, Gaza, the West Bank of the Jordan River, and Golan Heights to protect itself, because this was the second time, and second time a lot of Arab nations, but when we count, there were even more wars. But this was a time when several Arab nations had tried to eradicate Israel. Again, so surface level. He doesn't mention that Israel is suddenly occupying these areas. Okay, we continue from that. Israel has tried to negotiate, which I think was a wrong thing, but has tried to negotiate several times with different groups and has actually granted a lot of land to several Palestinian groups. It has pulled out of Gaza, and it has given many areas, and to some extent it has pulled out of the West Bank and has given several areas to the Palestinian Authority. What has happened after that? More terrorism coming out of both of these parts, more terrorism coming out against Israel. So again, this sort of like, well, if Hamas would have surrendered, what would happen after that? Well, depends. If Hamas has surrendered to the point that the Palestinians would completely lay down their arms and would actually completely disarm and stop attacking Israel completely, does he actually think Israel would just try to genocide the Palestinians just for the fun of it? Again, Israel, there are Arab people in Israel and they have been in a sense occupied after the independence war. They were basically under military rule for a long time, and after some time they were given citizenship and now are basically fully fledged Israeli citizens. This can happen for for the Palestinians too. Again, the only thing they would have to do is stop being aggressive towards Israel. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to get to that point, so I'll make this now. I mean, imagine comparing, and it's a bit unequal comparison, but imagine if Gaza were like Hong Kong. You know, right now you have things like Gaza is not fully independent. Israel does control many things for its own protection. But imagine if the Hamas, if it campaigned on some sort of let's get rid of let's separate the religion from our government, and let's use all the money we are getting, the most money anyone is getting. Let's use it. Let's build some investment projects. Let's have some liberal banking sector, and let's become a Hong Kong of the Middle East. What is stopping you from doing that? No, they want to kill Jews. That's what they've decided instead. And again, imagine if that, let's say that happened, that they were sort of becoming like a Hong Kong, and Israel would still be, in a sense, would try to be aggressive towards Gaza, which I don't think could ever happen. Do you think we would be sitting here and like still supporting Israel if this sort of switch would happen? No, we would be sitting here and saying everybody should give support to Gaza, and yeah, let's have this sort of like a free market revolution in Gaza. Like, we are only supporting Israel, and I'll just quickly mention, because I think he mentioned this at the start of the video, that basically he thinks the only way you can support Israel is if you view Israeli lives as worth more than the Palestinian lives. I support whoever is supporting individual rights, supporting liberty. If at some point it would, for some reason, switch, I would go and gladly support the Palestinians if they were freedom loving, if they wanted to have a free nation, if they would stand up against Fatah and Hamas. I would gladly support them.
Yeah, by the way, the Hong Kong example, Hong Kong wasn't built with humanitarian aid. And when you have a policy of so-called humanitarian aid, not because there was some, disaster that you have to then, people suddenly, I don't know, there was a massive earthquake and everybody lost everything they had. But humanitarian aid or so-called humanitarian aid, as a long-term policy, all you'll get is whatever they need to do to keep getting that so-called humanitarian aid. This is their, replacement for a productive endeavor is looking poor, which of course they're not doing a great job of unless you're not looking very closely. But yeah, thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. So an interesting part is what we're about to see next. Again, Emily Austin, I'm you know, it makes sense in a way to have her because she's so apologetic about her support for Israel that she sounds almost like the Israeli government. But she says at some point, well, there was no Palestinian state before 1967 and so on, which is, of course, a claim that one can make when saying you know, you're talking about Israel occupying Palestine. You're talking about one country occupying another, and that is not the case. But here is how he responds to it. I'm sure thinking he's being like super eloquent. This is a major mic drop moment, and of course, there's nobody to respond to it. So in that pure sense, it is, except it's absolutely terrible.
And as far as your point about like, you know, that there was never a currency or there was never an official state of Palestine, as I've said before, I just find this to be the most un-American, unenlightenment way of looking at things. I mean, all you have to do is read the
it's just comparing
well, no,
facts.
it's not. No, it is completely irrelevant. And here's why it's irrelevant. Read the Declaration of Independence. That's all you need to do, and it will completely dispel you of that. The Declaration of Independence starts off right away.
Well, the Middle East is not America.
Hold on, let me just say this. Let me just.
closer.
No, okay, fine, it's not, but these values transcend America. It's the idea of natural rights. Man is born free because these are God-given rights, and governments are just something we institute to protect our rights. And if the government isn't doing a good job of that, then the people have the right and maybe even the duty to overthrow that government. No offense, Pierce. You guys,
all right,
you've
all right,
too.
Yeah, what an absolute piece of shit. So he's comparing essentially the founding fathers. They overthrew. So what he's saying is the Palestinians are trying to overthrow the government, you know, their oppressors, the Israeli government, and you know, to institute a government that protects individual rights because man is born free. Man is born free, and in Gaza, he is then, from the moment he's born, taught that all he needs to do is to slaughter Jews. And nobody, again, not a single person in Hamas or in Fatah or in the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine or any organization, there is not a single organization that says we want to create a state of Palestine that is modeled on the United States of America either today or when it was founded, or anywhere in between. The only thing that they want that's going to be kind of similar is essentially elements of slavery when it comes to, I think, women and children and how they treat them.
So Dave Smith says you should read the Declaration of Independence. So I read it. And in the Declaration of Independence, it's written by people basically living under the freest nation in the world. British Empire, or the sort of like a British realm, was the freest pretty much place you could be in. And their problems with, well, first they try to negotiate or basically appeal to the British sense of, in a sense, law and order. They try to appeal to it and say, our rights are not recognized in the way you say they should be, and we want them to be. And they rebelled as the last option, as we can no longer tolerate it, and we need to rebel to establish an actual a freer nation, and a nation that would recognize the right to life. Sorry, I forgot. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sorry, that would actually fully recognize it. Recognize this. This is not happening in the Palestinian areas. This Hamas is not that, or the Palestinian Authority. This comparison, again, it's like so like ground level, as a sort of like imagining it that, you know, if you just, in a sense, it kind of reminds me of the sort of like early 20th century, you know, give determination to ethnic groups. Like, if only we give like a state to every ethnic group, it would somehow like be good, or it would somehow like solve these issues. No, you need an actual like and this is something I really dislike about the idea of the rights being natural. Rights are not natural. They are an invention. They are something we realize that we need, and we need government to protect them. And it is a discovery, and the Palestinians have not discovered it. If they ever want to live in a free nation, they need to learn what it means to have rights. It's not something you can just find in nature. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to finish that sentence, I have something else to say.
I mean, yeah, that's why I think, yeah, this comparison is just so out of it. Like, again, if it would be similar, if we had the Palestinian founding fathers, I would be gladly supporting them. I would want, like, Israel has many like, Israel is the freest nation in the Middle East, but it's still the Middle East, and you're
There would be no
comparing,
conflict if that
yeah,
was what the Palestinians
and yeah.
wanted. And yeah, again, back to the point that this is a dishonest point. There is no way that this guy actually thinks this is what the Palestinians want, because again, he knows enough facts about, about the conflict that there's no way he thinks there is anybody among the Palestinians who is fighting for a country like the United States of America. He knows they're fighting for totalitarianism, and fighting against the one place in the Middle East where you don't have totalitarianism. And this is what this libertarian has made his issue in recent months that he wants to talk about. Thank you, paperback writer. It's non-super chat, but thank you for mentioning that in that 1964 PLO covenant, they regard the West Bank as being part of Jordan. I'll take your word for it, and it makes sense. This was not called the West Bank and Gaza Liberation Organization. They wanted to liberate all of so-called Palestine, which is a way of saying we want to get rid of the Jews. There are some Jews here in a small patch of land in the vast sea of savagery that is the Middle East, and we want to get rid of that. And anybody in the West who supports that, that is what they're supporting. Now, because we are close to the end, I want to just give one little more thing that Dave Smith supports, which is a man called Vladimir Putin. And again, one of the things that I was watching in preparation for today, he mentions that Putin was provoked into this war. Of course, one of the favorite talking points of the pro-Russia side, and that at the beginning he offered a deal, a great deal, which is, as long as Donbass region is independent and Ukraine doesn't join NATO, then he'll back off. Now, again, this is you're advocating for surrender for a dictator after an act of aggression on his part. We know what happens. We know what happens in the Middle East because we have so many steps that Israel has taken in their surrender, specifically in the last 31 years since the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords led immediately to suicide bombings. The Camp David offer by Barak led to the Second Intifada with unprecedented suicide bombings. The disengagement from Gaza led to unprecedented rocket attacks on Israel and ultimately to October 7th. This is what happens, and this is what happens everywhere when you capitulate to savages. And he is, again, a supporter of Putin on this, and he interestingly, he calls NATO a military alliance. It's a defensive military alliance. It's an alliance to defend countries, and that is the purpose that would be the purpose of Ukraine joining, to defend themselves against something that already happened. So these people really lie through their teeth whenever they talk about anything. And it's not at all a surprise if you look at the libertarian movement and you look at how they attempt to speak supposedly for liberty, but without any principles underlying it, that they end up supporting the worst dictators in the world. And yeah, we should make note of that when those of us who advocate for laissez-faire capitalism think of them as allies.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I've only seen, yeah, I've heard this idea about Dave basically being a supporter of Russia, but I specifically haven't seen much about it, so I don't want to comment too much. I think he's bad enough on Israel, and I think a good demonstration of why I never called myself a libertarian.
All right, well, Ayn Rand Center UK members and YouTube members, the Productivity Hub returns right after this show. Garden like Rourke, that is the Productivity Hub for today. We will be back, of course, tomorrow with the Daily Objective, Monday with the Daily Objective and the reality show. If you see a topic scheduled in advance, of course, this is a war. Things are happening, and topics might be postponed or canceled because of breaking news. And of course, if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to our Substack. It's new. There's one article there. It was posted, was it yesterday or the day before? Yeah, that one is behind a paywall. That one is worth it alone. But if you subscribe for free, there will be some free content there as well. So make sure you subscribe to that. Link will be in the description. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you in the Productivity Hub in a couple minutes.